third webinar in BALLE's second annual Accelerating Community Capital Series. My name is Alyssa Barron, and I serve as the Managing Director and Network Services Director at BALLE. This is a re-recording of our March webinar. During the live recording, we had about 80 folks joining us from almost as many communities across the United States and Canada, and we are re-recording today's webinar due to a technical glitch. So you will hear the same presentation that was given live for participants in March, and then you will hear us serve up all of the questions that came through the chat and the Q&A, just as if you had been participating live. So we're delighted to be continuing this series this year, which launched in 2011. Our Community Capital webinars are held the second Tuesday of every month at this time, 10 a.m. Pacific. The series runs from January through December 2012 and is co-hosted by RSF Social Finance with advising, sponsorship support, and input from Slow Money, Portfolio 21 Investments, Finance for Food, Solidago Foundation, Main Street Resources, and others. I'm going to go through a bit of housekeeping, provide a few reminders, and then we'll introduce our topic and speaker for today. You can take home and try out right away. So each month we feature a case study with a community capital innovator, someone who has developed and piloted a working model for connecting local people's investments in businesses and farms to regional needs using regional resources. The innovators will present their model, and we allow time for dialogue and questions. We suggest you treat these calls as an opportunity to bring together a group of business owners, social entrepreneurs, lenders, philanthropists, and investors in your community who are interested in the topic. After listening to the webinar, you might spend an hour discussing with your group the applicability and relevancy to your community. You don't have to pay extra per attendee on the same webinar line. We also want to remind everybody about our Accelerating Community Capital Workshop at our annual conference. On May 16th in Grand Rapids, Michigan, BALLE, RSF Social Finance, and Slow Money are co-hosting a day-long workshop on community capital. We'll hear an overview of the current state of capital markets. We will explore the shift that's happening in the financial world to community capital. We'll go through what's legal, the current legal parameters around all of the community capital innovations that are springing up. And then we'll run through a series of replicable models for community capital strategies every community can take and pilot, as well as hear from some folks in the field who are trying to layer different forms of community capital to serve multiple investees and investors in the same community. And finally, we'll end with some collaborative work to help you really investigate how to replicate most effectively some of these strategies in your community with other peers working through similar mechanisms. So back to our webinar for today. We are just delighted to be featuring Claire's Restaurant from Hardwick, Vermont. So you're going to hear about this community-supported enterprise model for accessing multiple community investment and loan streams from Linda Ramsdell, who's a co-owner and co-founder of Claire's Restaurant and Bar. Linda also happens to be the owner of a bookstore and other entrepreneurial ventures in Hardwick, Vermont. She's going to tell you some about her story and how she became a restaurant owner. But really we're interested today not only in this as a model for replicating financing for restaurants, but the potential of the community-supported enterprise model for businesses in all sectors to access both investment and loan capital from their community members. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Linda, to tell us more about Claire's Restaurant, how you got where you are, and then some about your financing mechanisms. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Alyssa. It's really an honor to be part of this BALLE webinar series. So as you outlined, I'm going to start with a little history and orientation to Hardwick. Because it is about community-supported enterprise, it's very much about community, so I'm going to be telling something about that, and then I'll get into the nuts and bolts of our model. So to start with, you see here on this slide Hardwick in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. It's a community of with about a population of about 4,000 people. It's rural. Forestry, farming, and agriculture figure greatly in the local economy. Many people commute to Montpelier, which you can see there by Barrie to the south. It's a very hard-working community. There's an expression in Vermont there's an expression locally that's moonlight in Vermont or starve. And it's really true. A lot of people put together a variety of ways to make a living. Hardwick had its beginnings in the 19th century as a trade center focusing on agriculture. In the late 1800s, the granite industry began, and Hardwick eventually came to be called the building granite center of the world. And granite from Hardwick went to build capitals, city halls, post office buildings all across the country, and the town really had its heyday in the early 1900s. With the change in building materials at the beginning of the 20th century, the granite industry died out and was largely gone by the 1930s, and Hardwick began kind of a steady decline. By the 60s, Hardwick was known as Little Chicago, and Hardwick jokes were well known around the state, and Hardwick was sort of if you told people you were from Hardwick, you inevitably heard some Hardwick jokes. I grew up in the area in Craftsbury, which is about 12 miles away, and in 1988 I opened a bookstore in Hardwick using the tagline, "A bookstore in Hardwick is not an oxymoron." People told me that people in Hardwick don't read, and I was what my friends called a woman in transition, and I thought, I'll give it 5 years, and we'll see what happens. So that's how I came to start a business in Hardwick. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in the story to show you pictures of Claire's restaurant, so you get a sense of that, and then I'm going to go back to how I got from opening a bookstore in Hardwick 23 years ago to being a co-founder of Claire's Restaurant in 2008. So here are some slides of Hardwick and our main street. Claire's is in this mustard-colored building occupying these two storefronts here. My bookstore is now located as of January 16th in this other retail spot here. We have a 30-year-old food co-op here. The newspaper office is here, and this will give you a sense of Hardwick, which sits on the Lamoille River. Here is one of our windows. You can see Buffalo Mountain in the background. This is Claire's on a Thursday night when we have music. You see some of Stephen's preserves up here. Claire's in action. Stephen, our chef, in the kitchen. And here, again, our window, Claire's, local ingredients, open to the world. I'm going to go back to how we got to the point of opening Claire's, and it really came from my experience as a bookseller in Hardwick. Again, I found when I opened the bookstore that it very much wasn't true that people in Hardwick didn't read. In fact, I found that people were hungry for books and opportunities to gather around books. And out of that, and out of hosting events at the bookstore with authors, I wanted a place where people could go either for dinner with friends before an event or hang out afterwards and have dessert and drinks and talk. Places like that had come and gone in Hardwick, but there really wasn't a place, a community gathering place that met the needs that I saw in our town. What happened was, in 2003, then Governor Douglas came to Hardwick, and he had an open house for the citizens. And during that question and answer period with the governor, somebody said, "How can we get a good restaurant in town?" And the governor didn't have an answer for that, but that question by somebody in Hardwick started a conversation. And out of that conversation, a woman named Cynthia Tokos, she's since moved out of town, she and I sent out a letter in the middle of September 2003 asking people to come to the bookstore if they were interested in a new restaurant in Hardwick, and to explore what that restaurant would be like. What would it look like? What would it taste like? What would it cost? It was an open letter. People were invited to bring their friends. We really didn't know how many people would show up, but as it turned out, 55 people came to the bookstore, and that demonstrated to us that this was an idea worth pursuing and that there were lots of people interested. I want to say a little bit about our name. We established that right away. Claire's was one of my very first customers, and she was a woman in town who touched many people's lives, and she brought great people and great food together in her home, and it was that tradition that we wanted to honor. She reached out to many different parts of the Hardwick community, and that's what we wanted the restaurant to do. And she was a friend to many who had gathered, and she'd recently died, so we wanted to name the restaurant in her honor and to carry on her spirit. From that original gathering of 55 people, we formed a working group, and one of the things we did is investigate the Bobcat Cafe model with the help of restaurateur Robert Fuller, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. We tied up a building, and we sketched out financing, and we sought an operator. Hardwick at that time in 2003 and the beginning of 2004 was not a likely place to open a new restaurant. There was, as it turned out, we could find no one who was enthusiastic about being a restaurateur in Hardwick. A lot of restaurants had come and gone, some of them very quickly, and no one was optimistic about the chances of a new restaurant in Hardwick. We couldn't find an operator. We had to let go of the building that we had tied up, and the idea lay dormant, but I never abandoned it. In the meantime, Stephen Obranovich, who you saw earlier in the kitchen at Claire's, and his partner Michael Bozia had arrived from California. Stephen was the chef at a nearby restaurant, and I met them and I had a conversation with them, and I had said to Stephen, well, when you get that restaurant up and running, I'd love to talk to you about my idea for a restaurant in downtown Hardwick. Fast forward just a little bit, and Stephen became available as an operator in 2005. So at that point, we had an operator, but no location. And I want to tell the whole story because I think it can sometimes seem like, oh, it just sort of happens, and I just want to encourage everybody who's out there and runs into roadblocks now and then to that it isn't always as smooth as it might seem in retrospect. So in 2005, we began to explore locations. Hardwick is a very small town, and we wanted to be central, ideally on Main Street. There were no Main Street locations, but we wanted to be in the heart of the town. Sadly, the day after Thanksgiving in 2005, there was a fire right in the middle of downtown. Fortunately, no one was hurt. The building was badly damaged, but not structurally. And so we began conversations very early on in the game with the entities that were going to renovate the building, and expressed our interest in opening a restaurant when the building was renovated. Our interest in founding Claire's was to contribute to the economic and community revitalization in our area and to provide a third place for economic and social life on Main Street in Hardwick. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term third place, it's that place that is not work but not home, where people gather with friends or family. I want to emphasize that at this point, we didn't know what we didn't know. We were talking to a lot of people, and we were inspired by the Bobcat Cafe model of community investment. Robert Fuller is a restaurateur in the greater Burlington area, and he was very generous in sharing with us what he had learned opening the Bobcat Cafe in Bristol. He had been approached by some people in Bristol who were renovating a building and wanted him, an experienced restaurateur, to open a new restaurant there. And he kept saying, no, 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 I have enough restaurants, I'm not interested. And finally he said, okay, if 12 people will lend $5,000 to this effort, I will figure out the rest of the financing. And so he opened up that opportunity, and in a week he had 18 people who would lend $5,000 to the effort, and he finally capped the lenders at 32. I want to say that we were also inspired by Judy Wicks, your co-founder and the founder of the White Dog Cafe, who I had met at a booksellers gathering in 2004. So we were exploring, and we were talking to people and getting ideas, and we were referred to the firm Merritt and Moulton, and we started working with them in 2007. We had not budgeted nor had we planned for the amount of money that we spent on attorneys, but I want to emphasize again here and say that it was, as much as I hated to write the checks, it was a really, really great investment, because as we started to learn what we didn't know, we started to learn about private placement memorandums, securities laws, qualified investors, and what we needed to do to ensure that we were gathering money from our community in a way that was legal and would hold up to the scrutiny of the SEC. So the documents that we were able to come up with, working with Merritt and Moulton, the private placement memorandums, not only kept us on the right side of the law, but they were a great exercise in thinking through absolutely every detail of the business plan, financial scenarios, etc. We also, at this time, started a relationship with Paul Brune, who's the executive director of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. At the time, I think we all thought that the Preservation Trust was about keeping old buildings alive, but what we came to understand was that the Preservation Trust is also very concerned with the economic vitality of Vermont downtowns and with community gathering places that are the centers of Vermont's downtowns. What Paul Brune helped us to, and here I'm going to get into the more of the nuts and bolts of how we did this. What Paul Brune's idea was, and I think it's really central to how we set up our model, was the formation of two separate LLCs. One you could think of as a real estate holding company. So the Hardwick Restaurant Group holds the real estate, owns the major equipment, and the other LLC operates the restaurant. The benefit of having the two separate entities, one the operating and one the real estate, is that the community owns the space and equipment, and knowing that restaurants are really challenging businesses, regardless of what happens to the operating company, the community owns the space and equipment to bring in another operator if something does happen to the original operator. On the operating side, the operating company is free of much of the startup debt that restaurants often have. This slide again names the two LLCs that we formed, the Hardwick Restaurant Group and Claire's Restaurant and Bar. I am a partner who in both entities. I'm the only partner that is common to both entities. In 2007, we started out raising the money for both of these entities. It's not something I like to do at all, but I had a really strong belief in what we were doing. Raising the money mostly fell to me because I was the one with a strong local connections and the Main Street presence. Again, I operated the Galaxy Bookshop since 1988. Everyone knew where they could find me. They knew that I'd been working on this concept since 2003, and they knew I showed up at the bookstore most every day. So I started calling people, I set up meetings, I asked for referrals from people I talked to, and again, and I say this to encourage people who are in this part of the process, again, it wasn't something that I like to do or I'm comfortable doing, but again, I had that firm and strong belief in what we were doing, and so some days I would just literally force myself to make phone calls. When I talked to people, we had 4 different ways that they could be involved financially in Claire's. We were looking for equity investors in the Hardwick Restaurant Group. We were looking to lenders for Claire's, the operating company. We were looking for subscribers to our community-supported restaurant subscriptions, or people could come and eat and bring their friends once we were open. The Hardwick Restaurant Group holds a 12-year lease on the space. We prepaid the 12-year lease to get favorable terms. The Hardwick Restaurant Group built out the space, owns the major equipment, and subleases to Claire's Restaurant and Bar. In the Hardwick Restaurant Group, we have 15 equity investors. Some are couples. The investment ranges are from $5,000 to $175,000, and we raised $325,000 from equity investors. These investors were motivated primarily by social goals as well as financial goals, and those financial goals differed for different people. But when I was going out and seeking these equity investors, I emphasized that we really didn't know, I didn't promise them any great financial returns. It was all very, it was the risk was well known to people, and the people who became equity investors were mostly motivated by social goals and wanting to see their money at work in their town. 2 individuals also granted money to the Hardwick Restaurant Group through the Preservation Trust of Vermont, and these grants were used for purchases of major equipment. In 2007 to 2008, when we were seeking the equity investors, was a very difficult time. The market was tanking. On the one hand, people had less money available, but on the other hand, people were interested in a project that represented a more tangible asset, a place that they could see, that they could drive by and look into, that they could walk through the door and enjoy. At Claire's, our financial goal is to generate a moderate profit, to continually improve, and to provide a decent wage to everybody on the staff. In Claire's Restaurant, we have 3 operating partners, myself, Stephen Obranovich, who's our chef, and his partner and husband, Michael Bozia. We have a manager, Veronica Medwood. Michael and I are uncompensated, and Stephen is paid a salary as a chef, and Veronica is paid a salary as a manager. We raised $50,000 from community lenders. Most of those were in $5,000 loans. simple loans at risk. We also raised $50,000 from community-supported restaurant subscriptions. The subscriptions are inspired by community-supported agriculture. The way they work at Claire's is people paid $1,000 by the time we opened in May 2008. The subscribers have $25 subtracted from their check 10 months of the year for 4 years. So they basically eat their way back through their subscription. We didn't offer any benefits or premiums on the CSRs. We wanted to be really conservative and really carefully control our cash flow. The coupons are transferable. Families may and do share them. There are about 50 subscriptions. Many of them are owned by couples. So there are over 100 people attached to those subscriptions. As I mentioned, the loans are simple, unsecured loans. They're mostly in increments of $5,000. They mature in 5 years, and there's 5% interest compounded annually. We opened in May 2008, and one of the huge benefits of our model is that immediately we have about 150 people who have in some way made a financial commitment to Claire's. We also have artisans, producers, and growers who are really interested and motivated by our success. We opened in May 2008. Spring Festival is Memorial Day weekend in Hardwick, and we made a really big push to be open then to get people in through our doors. This slide reflects our mission statement. And 80 cents of every dollar that we spend on food at Claire stays in northern Vermont. And of that 80 cents, 65 cents of every dollar stays within a strict 15-mile radius of Hardwick and goes directly to producers, growers, and artisans. And this is a year-round commitment. I included this slide because it shows in our area we have a generation of farmers who came here in the 60s. Here we see Bruce Kaufman of Riverside Farm. He's on the far right. And then on the left are a lot of the people who farmed with him and are starting farms, a new generation of young farmers. Alyssa, this might be a good time to start with the questions.
Sure. So in our live webinar, we had questions come in about your customers, the private placement memorandum, the real estate side, the real estate LLC, Hardwick Restaurant Group, your financial status, the operating company side, Claire's Restaurant and Bar, and the investors in that process, the restaurant and the CSE, as well as cultural issues. So we're going to just start running through those kind of by category and keep teasing out exactly how this worked for you here. So let's start with your customers. Do you find your customers are primarily from Hardwick, or do they now come from further afield?
I would say both. On any given night that I come in the restaurant, I recognize the majority of people who are here. That varies. It varies somewhat by year. In July and August, there are a lot of people who have seasonal homes in the area or traveling through. But we were really, really conscious and really careful in building Claire's to not rely on the tourist trade or bringing people from far away. We really wanted it to be a place that was affordable to people in the area so that they could come, you know, many times a month, and that it wasn't just a special occasion place for people. So our menu is priced accordingly. We have a real range on our menu. So you could come in, for example, and have an appetizer and a beer, or you could have soup and a glass of wine, or you can come, you know, for the big plates and the special dinners. We really try to keep our one of our big challenges is to keep those menu prices affordable for our area, and we're working with this razor-thin margin between our cost of goods, which is higher and which we always plan to be higher, given where the food comes from and how it comes to us. It comes right from it comes as a box of potatoes, not as a bag that we throw into the fryer. So we have higher labor costs associated with the food prep being local. But we work with a really razor-thin margin so that anybody who wants to go out in our area can do that here at Claire's.
And so it sounds like, you know, there was a question, how does the community-supported enterprise concept affect your bottom line? Well, part of this is that you're looking at where you're sourcing from and trying to source locally from local growers. But then there's also this piece there about how it works once the community-supported enterprise subscribers come into the restaurant. So can you explain that a bit further? How do the funders who subscribe draw down their food account?
Mm-hmm. So the subscribers have prepaid $1,000 at our opening, and then they come in. They can come in once a month, 10 months of the year, and they can choose, you know, which months those are, and they have $25 subtracted from their check every time once a month, and that lasts for 4 years.
And so another question that came in is people trying to understand, are the subscribers also investors, equity investors? If so, is there a check? How do you have a check and balance between that? So talk about who is a CSC subscriber versus who is an equity investor.
Are all really, they're all separate ways of, they were all separate ways of raising capital. They're all separate mechanisms. So, for example, somebody who is a Hardwick Restaurant Group equity investor, but also wants a subscription, then they are. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, but they are equity investors and they are also subscribers. So they have their equity investment and they also have their piece of paper that says they're a subscriber. So they're two separate transactions. And
so you don't have bylaws or principles that balance their influence, because really they're different mechanisms. So the folks who have the subscription simply have pre-bought goods, in this case, you know, food, and you described how they draw that down to offset their costs in coming into the restaurant over 10 months of the year over a 4-year period, and that's the limit of their influence, you know, is that they're coming in and that brings in some regular customer base. And then, for example, the equity investors in the restaurant itself, you have a whole separate process for dealing with them. So somebody could choose to be a subscriber and an investor, but you've dealt with them separately, so you don't need bylaws or, you know, to balance their influence. Is that right?
That is correct. That's absolutely correct. And I think it's important too, and this is probably a good place to talk about the distinction between community-supported and community-owned. And it can be a tricky line to walk in some ways. Here we have all of these people who have really made a huge commitment to the restaurant in all of their different ways. but that doesn't confer ownership, and that's as the person who, as I described earlier, is the one who people know how to find. You know, I was on the receiving end of a lot of feedback, and it's a really important thing, I think, to be able to have a mechanism to absorb that feedback and respond to that feedback, but keep the line clear between ownership and support.
So the subscribers are supporters, but they're not owners.
Correct.
Great, thank you. So let's move to talking some about the Hardwick Restaurant Group and the real estate side of this. The first question that came in was you had noted that you were the only investor in both the real estate side, the Hardwick Restaurant Group, and in Claire's Restaurant Group. Is that intentional, and why is that you're the only co-investor on both sides?
It was mostly because of the resources that I have personally, and it especially on the Hardwick Restaurant Group side, and it felt like it was important for me to be also involved in the restaurant, since I felt a responsibility as the person who took the lead in raising the capital to have an interest in both entities.
So it wasn't a strategic reason, or there wasn't a legal reason. It just happens to be that you were somebody who had both the resources and the drive to invest in both.
That's correct.
Great. Now, was the space delivered ready to install a restaurant? You know, did the owner contribute to the fit out of the space? How did that work?
The owner did contribute to the fit out. One of the fortunate things about having started the conversation so early with the owner of the building was that we were able to plan together for, you know, how the space was configured. That said, the owner contributed some to the fit up, but Hardwick Restaurant Group also paid for a lot of the fit up.
Great. Now, you had mentioned that you prepaid the lease between the building owner and the Hardwick Restaurant Group in order to get a more favorable rate. Can you talk about the terms of that lease and how it was priced?
I'm sorry, what did you mean by how it was priced? Essentially, I guess I'm answering my own question. Essentially, we got a rate that was discounted from what the rate would have been if we'd been paying on a, you know, shorter term lease. Some people have asked why we didn't buy the space, in other words, condoize the building, and we have an option to buy at the end of 15 years, which is when the first time that option will be a possibility, because the owner used federal tax credits to renovate the building, and so condoizing the space wasn't an option before that 15 years expires. Great. So, I mean, it's also correct to say that because it was a renovated space and a new owner and a new, you know, they had a new model for how they were managing the building, you know, it was a little bit of a different situation than an owner that might have had an established rental price for a unit. You know, everything was sort of in flux at the time, or developing as we were in conversation.
Great. Well, I think it's so interesting for other communities to consider, you know, separating, for all the reasons you said, the real estate investment, so that you have a space so that no matter what happens financially with the restaurant, hopefully you'd still have the space and another restaurant could come in. And then, as you said, you know, the new restaurant starting up isn't saddled with the debt from the space and from the equipment. So let's talk a little bit about how the restaurant side is doing financially. Is the restaurant breaking even after debt service and operating expenses?
Yes, it is. We We are breaking even. We're showing on paper a very modest profit, which is consistent with our mission statement and our goal in opening the restaurant. We do not have the reserve we had planned to have set aside at this point for repaying the loans. So that's something that we are strategizing about now, and we need to address. But we are so we do not have the money set aside for the debt service at this point as of March 2012. But that is what we are working towards.
Great. So we'll come back to really understanding in more detail the motivations as well as the understanding about a return that your equity investors on the restaurant side expected. But let's start. Can you mention where your investors are from? Are they all from Hardwick? And are some of them also customers or co-owners?
All of the Hardwick Restaurant Group equity investors are either full-time residents of Hardwick or seasonal residents. There's almost all of them are full-time residents. There's one family that comes here on and off during the year.
Great.
And they're certainly customers. We see them here on a regular basis.
And are the lenders also on the restaurant group side? Are the lenders also locals?
Yes.
Great. And on the investor side, what's the definition of a qualified investor? And by a qualified investor, do you mean accredited investor?
Yes, and this is the area where we really relied on Merritt, and Moulton. Our private placement memorandum documents spelled out what resources an investor needed to make an equity investment. This is where we did really rely on the legal work of Merritt and Moulton, and I can tell you what elements made up our private placement memorandum, which was our business plan, our financial projections, our information about the owners of, on one side Claire's and on the other side the Hardwick Restaurant Group. But with regard to what constituted a qualified investor in Vermont, that we left all of that language to Merritt and Moulton, and I don't feel that I can speak specifically to that.
Okay. And how much did you spend on the private placement memorandum?
Between the two, both LLCs, it was between $10,000 and $15,000.
And in retrospect, do you think that could have been cheaper? Or do you think that's just what it cost?
I don't have experience retaining lawyers, I'm happy to say, and on our, it's not something that I have experience with, and I'm sure that it varies from community to community, city to city, and I think there probably are people who do it both more cheaply and more expensively. We went with this particular firm because they had a track record with other businesses we know who were doing raising capital in creative ways, and so it seemed to us like a good investment. But I'm sure it could be done for a lot more money, and it could probably also be done for less.
So this is one of those things that you said you didn't know what you didn't know at the beginning.
Exactly.
It turns out in terms of soliciting these community investors, it was important to have a lawyer involved to make sure that you stayed on the right side of the law in working with those investors.
Exactly, and there, we've seen other examples, even just in the state of Vermont, where in one case, a gentleman who was making a movie, who's in a lot of legal duress right now because of the way that he raised capital, and there was another community-supported enterprise nearby that I think didn't have quite the due diligence that we at the time it seemed like a great burden, but then when we had those documents in hand that were so detailed, it was really great for peace of mind and knowing that we could really back up what we were doing legally.
Great. And was there a financial institution that was involved in the private placement, or at least a type of the institution? Was it a bank or several banks or a credit union or something different?
No, there was no financial institution.
Okay, great. That was a question I don't think we actually got to in the live version.
No, I don't think we
we're
did.
able to get to now.
Yeah.
So
add that a little bit. When it was necessary, and we were counseled by Merritt and Moulton to, for example, we announced that we were going to open the restaurant at an event at the bookstore. Fittingly enough, with Bill McKibben, we announced that we were going to open the restaurant, but we could not say in that same at that gathering that we were seeking investors and lenders. That would have been in violation of the SEC rules, as we were counseled by Merritt and Moulton. So we made the announcement that we were opening, and then I started the individual conversations with the potential investors and lenders.
Great, and then use the private placement memorandum as the basis for giving them information.
Exactly.
And we had a number of questions about, how you found the investors and the return they expected, especially given that, as you said, you're breaking even now. You have a small profit on the books, but you don't yet have the reserve in order to do debt repayment. So talk about first, how did you find these folks? Do you have recommendations on building your reputation so you have a strong network to look for investors who might be willing to invest in an opportunity like this? So, how did you go about finding those folks, and what really was driving them when they came to the table?
Without exception, it all started. The people that I had those conversations with were all people I knew from my, at that point, 18 or 19 years operating the bookstore in Hardwick. In many cases, they were the same people who had come to that original meeting of the 55 people at the bookstore in 2003, so 5 years before we actually opened. And so, from a very practical, looking at it very practically, when we had that, I had extensive notes and names and addresses of those 55 people. And then any time anybody said, oh, I heard you were interested in starting a restaurant, that, they went on to that same list. And so that was the base of looking for those investors and lenders. And then in some cases, I think I mentioned in the general presentation, when I went to talk to those people or meet with those people, I asked if they knew others who would be interested in being lenders or investors. And so in some cases, I was referred to people that way. But it all started from the customer base of the Galaxy Bookshop.
So it was important
in Hardwick and showed up every day for 20 years, but really I think it is I can't underestimate, I wouldn't underestimate the power of that relationship. And in a lot of cases it was a 5-year conversation with some people about the restaurant.
Well, and they often say in social marketing, for example, that your messenger is as important as the message. And so I think in this case, when it comes to investments and community loans, for somebody to be working with somebody that they know and that has a presence in the community, it makes sense that would confer confidence, and that those relationships, that circle of relationships would be what would help bring people in and give them the confidence to explore. So I think that makes sense. And what about what kind of return did the 15 equity investors expect? So was there a time frame that they were given? Did they come and they say, hey, we're just really most interested in the social goals, and so, we're not expecting a return, or we're not expecting a return for a certain number of years? Talk more about what they're expecting for as a return on that.
I would characterize them really as social investors or angel investors. I was very in the private placement memorandum and in our financial projections, we had 3 scenarios, and it was sort of a case of if, and it was really iffy, and I was really clear in talking with people that this was really about, if they made this financial commitment, it was really about carrying this project forward and hoping for return. I did not, I was really careful not to promise financial return because I really didn't feel like I was in a position to do that. We were in really unknown territory, and I wanted to be clear with people that this was about it was about Hardwick and seeing something happen here that they really believed in, and that hopefully there would be financial return, but that couldn't be their primary motivation.
Got it. So if folks are wondering, investors quit, or if they wanted to take their money out after a certain number of years, how would that work?
None have quit, and if they're free to, to sell or transfer their investment, but no one has done that.
Okay. And would you say, overall, what's your temperature reading? Consider a co-op as a model. So even though you haven't structured the legal entities here as co-ops, was a co-op a model in any way for the relationships that you've set up?
We did consider that as a financial model. I think, especially because almost right next door we have a very successful, I think it's 30 years old now, food co-op that, we share, we have a lot of customers in common, so people are certainly familiar with the co-op model of ownership. What we, as I'm talking now as the Claire's partners, the Claire's partners really wanted to have an LLC model rather than the co-op model, just in terms of the way that we thought that we could best manage the restaurant and the whole project.
Okay.
And that was our, it's possible we would do things differently. It's possible that I don't want to, I don't want to be negative about that model because I think it's just such a great model. But at the time that we were getting going, we didn't see that as a viable model for ourselves, at least.
Got it. Great. Thank you for speaking to that. There were a couple of questions, given how much you were driven really by creating this business and creating these investment opportunities for community members to invest in their place by social goals. There were some folks who wanted to have us end by reflecting on, where the community is in relation to the restaurant. So we had a question that said, that Hardwick wasn't a place people were always proud of, given some of the decline over time. And so have the bookstore and have the restaurant changed residents' perceptions of the community?
They certainly have, and I would be very quick to add, along with so many other, especially agricultural enterprises that have really, we had a great foundation of agricultural enterprise from the very beginnings of Hardwick, and then there was sort of a wave of organic farmers that sort of back to the landers that came in the 60s, and now there's a whole new generation of particularly young farmers and value-added food producers, and it's just really people have sort of trade a lot of energy with each other, I guess is the best way to put it. And so there's a whole lot going on in the sort of food and agriculture sector, and actually alcohol as well, with new distillers and brewers in our area. So I would say that it really, the restaurant and the bookstore have changed the perception of Hardwick, but only in concert and cooperation with everybody else who's really focused on the same goals. And Claire's ends up being sort of the show place and the place to taste a lot of what's going on in our area. And I would say that the reason that Claire's is as exciting as it is because of what the farmers and producers and artisans bring to us every day.
That's very interesting. And a woman in the live webinar mentioned that Ben Hewitt's book, The Town That Food Saved, goes into more detail about Hardwick's resurgence through food and community enterprise. So we'll recommend that as well. And is Claire's mentioned in that book?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Linda. For folks I know who want to access you in person and go deeper on any of these pieces of the Claire's Restaurant model, you'll be at the BALLE conference talking in a session in our community capital track. So I encourage anybody who's not already coming to the conference to come and find Linda and hear another version of the story and get a chance to go deeper in person in Grand Rapids at the BALLE conference in May. But we really appreciate your time, Linda, not only for the live webinar, but also for our re-recording today. So thanks very much for the work that you're doing in the world, and we wish you a lot of luck as you continue to take this forward, and look forward to continuing to hear how Claire's Restaurant does.
Well, thanks very much, and I hope to meet people in person in Grand Rapids.
All right, thank you.